Okay, great interlude. Welcome to session 2A. I'm Brian Himmelblum, your moderator. We have a really special panel coming up here, and I'm going to just cut myself off and try to spotlight our four speakers. And I believe Katie is running it, so go ahead. You have the floor.
Hi there, thanks so much. I'm gonna turn it right away to Elizabeth Heron-Dean, who's actually gonna moderate the session for us. But thank you so much, we're glad to be here, and Elizabeth's gonna start us off.
Great, thanks Katie, and thanks so much everyone for joining us for our panel this afternoon. This panel is called Food Security in Alaska, Elevating Seafood in the Local Food Web. And as Katie said, my name is Elizabeth Heron-Dean, and I'm joining you from Tlingit Ani, the traditional lands of the Tlingit people, where I live and work in Juneau for the advocacy organization Salmon State. And I'm also on the executive committee for the Local Catch Network, which is a group that you'll hear more about shortly. Here in Alaska, I think as you all know, we're very rich with seafood, both in diversity and abundance. And yet it can be incredibly hard to find and buy local seafood. Because so much of it is exported out of the state. And because of that, we lack the infrastructure, the markets, and the pathways needed to distribute local seafood to local Alaskans, especially our more vulnerable populations, including food insecure families, children, and elders. And so in this panel, we're going to hear from several fishermen and seafood suppliers from around Alaska, as well as others in the lower 48, and hear what they're doing to help change that and some of their important work to increase direct access to local seafood. And our hope is that their stories can provide inspiration and insights for others working to increase Alaska's food security and hopefully spark more collaboration and coordination with the local seafood community here in Alaska. So we're going to start our panel with just a quick round of introductions from our panelists. And then we're going to dig a little deeper into some of the challenges, the lessons, and the recommendations that our panelists have for integrating seafood into the local food web. And after that discussion, we want to open it up to all of you and your questions and thoughts. So please do use the chat box to post your questions and comments as we go, and we'll try to get to all those at the end. So with that, we're going to get started with our first panelist intro. We'll start with Jordan Richardson, and Jordan is the manager of the Local Catch Network, which is a community of small boat fishermen and seafood suppliers from around North America. And Jordan joined the Local Catch Network at the end of 2020 and brings an incredible amount of insights and knowledge from her many years working with farmers and actually doing some farming herself. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jordan.
Hi, everybody. As Elizabeth said, I am the network manager for Local Catch. I'm going to give you guys a little overview of what Local Catch Network is and what we do as a community. Local Catch is a network that spans the US and parts of Canada. We have about over 500 members who are a part of our network, including seafood harvesters, businesses, researchers, technical assistance providers, and partnering organizations, all striving and aiming to strengthen local and regional seafood systems through community-supported fisheries and direct marketing. Our members are what we call values-based members. So we have a core set of values that all of our members strive to achieve in their daily operations. And those were co-created in 2016 by the members of our network. Collectively, we strive to raise the visibility and viability of these seafood businesses who participate in direct marketing through a number of ways, including offering ways for members who are participating in similar work to work together to, again, uplift this seafood system, local and regional seafood system. And then we also try to find ways to just connect people across industries. So connect people across ag and in seafood, because as Elizabeth mentioned, there are so many similarities and parallels, and there's so much importance in including seafood in the greater food system conversation. We also conduct research to help us better understand the depth and breadth and also needs of the seafood community. And then lastly, we provide technical assistance. So we provide services like helping people apply for grant funding, helping people, again, to connect with others who have been participating in direct marketing, and et cetera, just to help uplift people who are participating in this work. I did mention that the core values are one of the things that really center and guide the work of Local Catch Network members. And I'll just touch on a few here, and I'll drop a link in the chat as well, so you guys can look at the core values that were co-created back in 2016. But a few of those include community-based fisheries, so focusing on members who fish, work, and live in coastal communities, fair access to the resource, eating with the ecosystem or with the seasons, knowing who caught your fish and where it comes from and how it was handled. And then similar to what we're going to be speaking on, and you'll hear from panelists about today, is increasing accessibility to seafood and equity within the seafood system. So again, I'll drop information about Local Catch in the chat, but I'll pass it back over to Elizabeth for now.
Great, thanks, Jordan. Yeah, so now we're going to hear from some of the Local Catch members, both in Alaska and the lower 48. And our next introduction is going to be Alan Lovewell, and we're really honored and excited to have him join us from Monterey, California, where he's the CEO of Real Good Fish. So, Alan.
Really great to be here and speak to you all from the same very distant coastline, but in a community that has a lot of roots also up in Alaska. A lot of the fishermen that we work with and a lot of our community ends up fishing in Alaska, for the summer months. But a little bit more about Real Good Fish. We started back in 2012 as a community supported fishery, really, set out to do what was mentioned earlier, which is provide local seafood to our community, which was surprisingly difficult to find. And I think, a lot of the members that are part of this Local Catch network are solving that problem. Real Good Fish really sort of set out to provide that direct access, that traceability, that storytelling, the connection with the local fishermen and women, and provide that diversity of the species that folks had never had before. And in this work, it wasn't too hard to start to realize that social equity was a really big part of what we were doing and the value set of what we were creating. And that's really sort of where institutions started to come and play a important role, not just in our supply chains, but also in achieving the broader goals of our mission, and really starting to think about how we think about food and seafood in particular as a community value, and that required access and in its all forms, both in distribution and in price point. So it's really sort of been an evolution for the company and for our operations to really, again, think about the ways in which a company like ours and many companies who are often criticized for being too expensive for the masses can really start to come up with creative solutions for reaching people who would otherwise not be able to afford the local sustainable seafood that we're supplying.
Great. Thank you, Alan. Now we're going to bring things back to Alaska, and we'll get a quick intro from Katie Rexford, who manages Catch 49, which is a program of the Alaska Marine Conservation Council.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Elizabeth, and thanks, Alan, for that great overview of your program. So Catch 49 is also based on a community-supported fishery model. And as Elizabeth mentioned, we're a program of the Alaska Marine Conservation Council, which is a fishermen's-based nonprofit organization that's been working on protecting our marine environment through advocating for best fishing practices, for habitat protection, and for local stewardship of our fisheries. Another thing that AMCC has been working on also is access to our fisheries, to make sure that our community members actually have a pathway to get into fishing in a way to make that a sustainable livelihood, theoretically a year-round livelihood. And kind of the completing that circle on the other end of things is Catch 49, because if fishermen are out there fishing, then they need to have somewhere to sell their fish. And who better to sell their fish to than other Alaskans? And so Catch 49 works with small boat Alaskan fishermen to bring the best of our seafood resource to your dinner tables. We are primarily based in Anchorage. Our distribution center, I should say, is primarily based in Anchorage, but we deliver fish. Well, we have fish available for pickup in Anchorage and Fairbanks. We go up to Fairbanks about every month or so. And so we also have been, struggling with the access issue of not just fishermen getting into the profession, but also how do we make local seafood accessible to, average Alaskans. Despite all the, transportation and other issues and barriers to bringing the fish physically to your table, but how do we make it affordable? How do we get it to people where they are instead of having to have them come to us and things like that. So we've been working with a few other community supported agricultural organizations, mostly in Anchorage so far, Arctic Harvest Deliveries and the Matsu Farm Co-op, and kind of focusing on this whole menu idea. Those businesses are so great at reaching folks that are interested in local produce and local eggs and local meat. And so it's only been just recently that they've been carrying local seafood. And local seafood is just such an important part of Alaska's heritage and the way that we have eaten for years. So this is just one way that we're trying to make sure that even more people have access to our best resource. We've also been working with a couple of local shelters in Anchorage to donate fish. Which is, a great way to kind of touch some of our more underserved communities. But as anybody who works in fishing knows, that's a program that also is tough to support financially ongoing. So we've been working on ways that our members can, contribute to a donation pool so that we have more fish to donate. And we're always looking to our local Catch Network members for new ideas and ways that other folks are doing just that. So with that, I will hand it back to Elizabeth and we'll hear from some of those folks.
Awesome. Thanks for that great overview, Katie. Next, we're going to hear from Linda Benkin, a commercial fisherman who's based out of Sitka and is the founder of the Alaskans' own community supported fishery. And Linda wears a lot of other hats. She's also the executive director for the Alaska Longline Fishermen's Association and Alaska Sustainable Fisheries Trust. So, Linda.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Great to be with everybody here today, focused on this really important topic. Just to give you a little background, so Alaskans Owned is a partnership between ALPHA, the Alaska Longline Fishermen's Association, and the Alaska Sustainable Fisheries Trust. And the two organizations work on a host of programs to maintain the viability and sustainability of our fisheries and also the health of our fishing communities. And Alaskans Own was really an outgrowth of us hearing from Alaskans that they didn't have good access to high quality seafood, which is astounding. I think Elizabeth's talked about how important and how much seafood comes to Alaska. Through Alaska, it's 5.6 billion pounds a year through our ports, but less than 1% actually stays in Alaska. So we launched Alaskans Own. We tried a couple different business models at first, started it 12 years ago. And really what worked for us was the community supported fisheries model of a forward funded subscription service. We have distribution centers in Sitka, Juneau, Anchorage, and Fairbanks, and then we direct ship also to other parts of the state. And a lot of what we work to do, along with making that seafood available, is to tell the story of our fishermen's work to keep the resource healthy, to maintain access, to help young fishermen get started in these fisheries. And so people know when they buy the seafood, they're supporting that work. And I think that's the value-based approach that's really the common denominator to the work that all of us are doing here. Having Alaskans Own up and running allowed us to facilitate fish donations for the Fish to Schools program that was started in Sitka. It took a while to get off the ground, but with Sitka Conservation Society really leading the way of working with the schools in Cisco and our fishermen signing up to donate every year. The processors donating a lot of the processing for that. So definitely a community effort to make sure we had good fish in the schools, and then fishermen going into the schools when they could, on a day when fish was being served, to talk to kids about a life on the water and share with them some of their favorite fishing lures and fishing stories. It also allowed us in 2020, when the pandemic hit, to quickly recognize where we could help. And it started with us providing seafood every week to families that self-identified as being in need in our community. We would deliver the seafood to their door. And then quickly we heard requests from outside Sitka for help, and with a host of partners, funders, Catch Invest, the Alaska Community Foundation, partners like Sea Alaska, Chignik tribes all throughout Southeast Alaska, the Wave Foundation, which helped us reach military families in the Anchorage area. We were able to donate over 630,000 seafood meals to families across Alaska and some in the Pacific Northwest. And I think what was really key to us in how we ran that donation was we did our best to support local fishermen and local processors when we purchased seafood. So we asked what seafood was losing its markets with restaurants closed and where were prices dropping. And we tried to buy that seafood, make sure it was the highest possible quality, and then deliver it to communities to meet the request of that community, whether they wanted it filleted or in some cases they wanted it round, a whole fish, frozen whole, so they could do the processing, which certainly isn't as satisfying as being able to catch it yourself, but at least you can then dry it, can it, freeze it, put it up as a family or as a community in the product form that's most important to you and your family. So that's all work that we really hope to be able to continue. We're working right now under a grant from USDA, a regional food system planning grant. And our goal is to make this kind of a distribution system sustainable over the long term for Alaska, where we are supporting our local fishermen. We're doing regional distributions. We're doing it in a way that meets cultural and nutrition needs, and also aiming to reduce some of the waste, to improve utilization of seafood, have some product that we can provide that's really affordable to those who are not just receiving a distribution, but looking to be able to purchase some seafood. So sort of working with a host of partners, building a steering committee from across the state to be able to sustain that work into the future. And Elizabeth's part of that effort. So great partners involved. And thanks, I'll stop there.
That's great. Thanks, Linda. Okay, last but definitely not least, we've got Emma Kramer in Girdwood, and Emma's a commercial fisherman who sells her catch through her direct marketing business, Straight to the Plate. So, Emma.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I am really excited to be a part of this conference, and I'm honored to be a part of this panel. As I speak about the ways that our business, Straight to the Plate, is increasing local access, I'm also going to finish with some of the challenges that we've been experiencing as we do try to grow. I've been fishing with my husband since 2014, which in the fishing world is not a long time. And I came to it with such innocent eyes. As I was picking fish and observing, I said to my husband, there's politics in fishing? I thought we were offshore. I thought we were out here on our own. Well, I came to understand the corporate oppression. And immediately I thought there's got to be a better way. And so I started doing some research, Instagram research, and I came upon the world of direct marketing. And I literally saw Alaska's Own and thought, that's brilliant. And I have family in Monterey, and I thought, wow, real good fish. Like, these were some of my heroes. And they led me to this world where I have not been able to turn away, because it's so much more regenerative for our economy. And it is truly about social equity and like helping build communities. So here we are, and I'm on a panel with these folks, and it's for different reasons, but I'm so proud of it. But what I've learned along the way is that every community has its need, and it shows itself in a different way. And so here I am in a ski town. Land is expensive. We're only 20 miles from the Prince William Sound where we fish, and we have to drive through a mountain. There are no processors anywhere nearby. Most of the seafood is processed out of state, as we know. And it really came down to finding how we can sell locally. So we've kept it simple. We sell best when we sell whole fish, heads on, gutted, and bled. People get to utilize the whole fish. They get to experience the fish and learn and feel grounded in that food. And although it limits us from the folks that we can sell to, we're not catering to tourists. RV campers sometimes have to borrow a fillet knife. We're not permitted to fillet, so we use harbor facilities and a fish tote. And sometimes we have to buy bags of ice. Like, it's ridiculous, but we do it because the energy exchange is so wonderful. You tell your story, you talk about the weather, you talk about the challenges you face, and you get to hand over those fish to the people that really appreciate it. So once it's been this way, it's so hard to sell your fish to a tender that picks them up, throws them down, doesn't ice them, and doesn't even tell you what they're going to pay for them per pound. So being a part of the direct marketing world has been inspiring, and we've tried to figure out the ways to grow. We're working on grants to help us with a freezer truck. We would love to join the food hub, but it's based in Homer, and Girdwood can't quite join till we get more vendors. So we're working on a grant for that. We've had great success with a couple restaurants, but through COVID, a couple of those restaurants closed. We've had good success here in Girdwood, and part of that is realizing that it's the food system that's broke. So working collectively with other food vendors that are just roasting coffee or making honey. It is a lot more artists than food vendors, but we're slowly trying to build that local farmers market in a ski town. Down on the peninsula, there's so many wonderful agricultural developments, and I've seen fishing go hand in hand with that, like the CSA and CSF partnerships. And so our CSF has had more response from the lower 48, and we've realized that shipping is just not the way to go. And so we're really trying to take all the inspirations that we see around us and customize that for our local challenges. And we're still doing it. So I hope I have good news to report, but it's an important issue, and I'm so glad that it's being spoken about today.
That's great. Thanks so much, Emma. Yeah, and it's great to have you on here. It's really awesome how you all have been at this work in different ways and for different lengths of time. And I think just so much to share with each other. So I'm going to just sort of throw some questions out there to the full our group here. And I'm going to let you guys chime in as you want and feed off of what you hear others say or respond to, because again, you all are bringing such unique insights and perspectives. And I think just, yeah, we can learn a lot from each other. But I'll sort of start with you all have been at this for a while. You all have different business models and have developed different programs to address some of the equity access issues you've touched on. I'm curious if you guys would be willing to reflect on, do you consider your business or your program to be sustainable and to be scalable? And sort of related to that, what are some of the challenges and barriers that are keeping your operations from being sustainable and scalable? Some of you touched on funding and other things, but curious for your reactions to that question. So I'll open it up.
I'm happy to.
I can jump in real quick and say that.
Go ahead, Alan.
Okay. That, with this business, it was really important for us to have multiple sort of channels of operations, mostly in revenue streams, largely again from a resilience and sustainability standpoint. And that showed to be extremely important during COVID. And I think a lot of seafood businesses sort of experienced this, directly or indirectly, one way or another. And for us, what it amounted to was, our beta tray program, which I forgot to mention by name in my introduction because that was too brief. But beta tray, which was our direct to institutions, public schools in particular program, as a result of COVID, shut down overnight. And we built that business and that model to be self-sustaining via a critical element and design element, which was that we didn't want to subsidize the fish. There's a lot of funding out there, and there's certainly ways in which you can get other people to pay for your fish to go to places where it should be going. And I'm not putting that down by any means. I think it's a really important thing to do, and we've done work that way. But in trying to come up with a sustainable financial model, we really thought it was important for us to create intrinsic value where that product could sell at a market price to those institutions, and not necessarily be left to the risk of funding or lack of funding. But still, nonetheless, COVID shut that business down, but the direct-to-consumer business took off. And you can imagine in another universe or another world, the exact opposite happening. But again, it just to reinforce sort of the resilience in multiple channels of income and different accounts that allow you to sort of not only take advantage of existing markets, but also prepare for big shocks in our economies. Not unlike the fishing enterprise itself, where it's really important as a fisherman to have a portfolio of fisheries that you target, to adapt to the ebbs and flows of species availability. So that's where sort of the sustainability of the business comes in, and then sustainability from these individual programs. That's a great topic, and the institution ones, it's a really tough one because of the low margin aspect of it. The high sort of logistics needs, it's a higher processing cost. Most of these times you're freezing, you're transporting in pallets, boxes, those sorts of things, probably in greater distances as well. And that just means more potential risk, right? So, the longevity and future of that is uncertain right now. We're still trying to figure it out. We're still sort of in the wake of COVID with our beta trade program, trying to figure out what we're going to do. That said, we did do a quick pivot through the similar program. I think the same program that Linda mentioned, the Catch Invest Catch Together group. We were able to direct a lot of seafood that was sitting in a freezer that was supposed to be destined for schools. We redirected that towards food banks, and that was really sort of a lifesaver for us, because that large amounts of seafood were in the freezer without a home, and you can only put fish in the freezer for so long before you lose it. And having that opportunity to work through that group in a subsidized way, right? They paid for that fish to get it to these institutions, which is exactly why, I'm not speaking poorly of that, but rather recognizing it's part of the strategy. It's part of the important understanding about the economics and the financial models around these programs.
That's great. Thanks, Alan. And yeah, Linda, if you want to feel free to build off of that.
Sure. Yeah. I think one of the challenges we face is that CSAs have become fairly central to life for a lot of people. People will talk always about sustainable agriculture and who's your farmer. I see mariculture starting to grow in that space, but just over and over, seafood gets left out of that conversation. And it's just not as central to people's thinking about food security and about social equity as far as who has access to go fishing and who has access to the fish. And supporting these small businesses just is the way I think our country cares about small farmers. They need to care about small fishermen because small fishermen are really central to the health of coastal communities all around this country, well, around this world, and a huge part of food security for communities all around this world, as well as certainly in the state of Alaska. So I'm hoping part of what this panel does is centralize seafood fishermen a little bit more in this conversation about local foods and about food security in Alaska and across the country, as well as broaden the minds of people who do support these efforts with grants. The USDA needs to be reminded regularly that fish is also food. And I think also what we're hoping is to push them more and more to recognize that purchasing fish locally for regional distribution is, should be a key focus rather than bringing in sort of big commodity foods from other places and dropping them where there's food need. I mean, certainly it's important to meet food need, but if you undermine local economies, you make it that much harder for that economy to get back on its feet. So if we instead support local economies while doing food distributions, seafood distributions, that's a win all around. And so I think that's a big part of what we see or we feel like has been at times a stumbling block for our growth, but our program's been sustained for 12 years, so we feel fairly confident we have a sustainable model, and just looking to help more people be aware of how important it is to know where your food comes from, how it was grown, how it was harvested, who was the person who did it, and what their contribution is to the community, shortening those food chains to address climate change, all those pieces that are, I think, central to everybody's thinking on this issue here. That's what helps make it be scalable and helps make it be successful in a broader area.
Great. Thanks, Linda. Katie and Emma, I'm curious for your thoughts. It's been touched on a little bit, just some of the partnerships that have been key to creating new pathways and new markets for local seafood. And, that's through CSAs or, working with other like-minded values-based entrepreneurs. I'm curious if you two can share more about your experiences working with, who were some of those key partners out there in the ag and other sectors and in the food system where you found some good traction and potential.
Sure, I can jump in. Yeah, it's really interesting listening to all the great points you guys are making about that. I think that, so I mentioned a couple of my key partners in the CSA realm, Arctic Harvest Deliveries and the Matsu Farm Co-op. And one thing about working with groups like that is that their customers kind of already have an appreciation for the intrinsic value of these really, hyper-local supply chains. And, if you're going to a person who's already a customer of a CSA, they're already kind of bought in, mentally to the value of local food, right? So it's not as far as a jump for them to then say, well, of course, if I'm buying local, greens and vegetables, then of course I'd love to buy local seafood as well. And, one thing Alan said earlier about trying to build the intrinsic value and people's appreciation for the fact that, good local seafood is not always the most inexpensive expensive seafood that you can find in the store. And the reason for that, which is a big part of telling the story, is that we're talking about paying fishermen a living wage. We're using community-based processors that are much smaller, and so they're not working at the scale that some of the bigger corporate guys are working at, and so their labor costs and operational costs are just necessarily higher, and so our costs along the way are a little bit higher, but all of that money is staying in our local communities, and I think that educating consumers about all the values all along our short supply chain is one way to kind of build people's appreciation for this food. But yeah, the partnerships, we've also worked quite a bit with some local chefs who also kind of share these values and like to use the seafood to demonstrate that and educate their consumers about that. Same kind of issue about all the different ways that this plate of delicious seafood is helping your community, not just the person that you're actually doing the transaction with, but there's 5 people down the line that this is really making their community sustainable and their livelihood sustainable, and so that we are able to actually make a living where we live in the beautiful, more remote parts of Alaska. So.
I'll toss in my 2 cents on this. I was really excited to discover Catch 49. And then I was like, okay, how can we fit in that part of the cool food system that we have here? And I'm only 40 miles from Anchorage. There's one road to get there. And I know a lot of you Alaskans already know this. The other place where we're coming from, Whittier, is about as opposite as Cordova would be. And those are both the harbors that are part of our fishery. Cordova, there's so many wonderful groups to work with, like 60 Degrees North. They are a fisherman-owned processing company. They do wonderful, wonderful work. But for the time that we want our fish processed to be able to sell to the throngs of people in our town in the summer, it doesn't work. It requires a ferry. It requires a freezer van. And so we realized real quickly that we would love to work in Cordova, but we don't live in Cordova. So then we had to come back to our community and see all the things that we're missing to support fishermen. And so for those who don't understand gill netting, your boat's only going to hold a couple thousand pounds. If you want to fish for the whole 36 hours, you got to get that fish off your boat so you can catch more. If you have to drive an hour and a half to a harbor and hope that there's not a lot of recreational boaters in your way that you could use the one crane to get your fish off, you've already wasted all your fishing time. So fishermen that would love to be doing what we're doing don't see it as a viable option. And so they choose the unsustainable options. They choose the extractive options, not because that's what they want to do, but they may not know the other options. They don't see a pathway to it. It's too much work. And so when we look to grow our business, our 2-person business is amazing. And so the only way to scale is to have more employees. And as we live in a town that's a ski town, it's so transient. There's no place for folks to really afford to live and get a living wage. So we're experiencing a lot of these outside of the food systems issues of our society that trickle down and they affect things. And so the corporate models that are already in action in this state are pumping the fish out. And I'm so inspired by folks that just see that as wrong. And my heart goes out to Native communities that are the most affected by this. And the person that spoke before this, Ava Dawn Burke, I'm so grateful that all these conversations are being had. And so many of us have the same goal, which is to keep seafood local because it's healthy, it's good for our communities, it's more sustainable. And just in the way that we don't target mass amounts of chum salmon or pink salmon, we just try to target the sockeye. We carefully put them on ice, and then we carefully bring them home. It's like so simple, but that's not always the way it's set up to succeed. So.
Thank you so much, Emma. I'm curious, you all have, I think touched on some, there's a lot of barriers and challenges, and they're all pretty complex, right? And interwoven. And as we start to tease them out, you realize it's tied to other issues that might not even be related to food systems, but sort of these bigger systemic issues. But funding, I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts on, funding opportunities, sources out there? Where have you had success in bringing in the funds to help sort of subsidize, like you said, Alan, earlier, subsidizing your efforts to bring good local fish to schools and institutional buyers and others. And Linda, you've been doing incredible work to access funds with USDA as well as foundations, but curious if you guys could share some of your lessons and, where are you finding these resources to support your work? And if resources are lacking, what are your recommendations, especially for those who have access, the ability to control those resources, whether it's agency staff or policymakers or others, but yeah, what can be done to help free some of that up for your work?
Yeah, maybe I'll go first this time and Alan can jump in after me. So we did put a few suggestions in the chat because someone had asked that question. So we have been fortunate. We did receive a USDA local food promotion program and farmers market grant that helped us access some new markets and grow to scale. We've had some local support from businesses that helped us just get some basic infrastructure of good quality freezers to make sure that we were maintaining the quality of our product over time. And I think the real place where I see, and Alan also said, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, their Fisheries Innovation Fund has supported not so much our Alaskan Zone program as the stewardship that's the story behind our program, but it's certainly all connected. We've had, built a good working relationship with Seafood Producers Cooperative in Sitka, which has made a huge difference. It's a fisherman-owned processing and marketing cooperative, and having that group as partners has been also critical to our sustainability. But in terms of where I see, and I talked about this a little bit already, but USDA right now has been inviting a lot of input on what they might do to increase food security. And our feedback has consistently been to them and to our congressional delegation that they need to remember fish is food. They need to think about strengthening local food systems, regional distribution of food, providing infrastructure to support that, whether that's, freezer vans to get fish to the place, like what Emma's talking about, cranes to help get fish off of boats, all those things. I mean, part of the challenges for us of being at farmers market is there isn't usually a place to plug in your freezer and keep your product at the quality we require for our Alaskan zone fish. So getting USDA to think that way is, to me, important in terms of the success of what all of us, the sort of values associated with this, but also the climate aspect of shortening our food delivery systems and being ready for, I think, more of the kind of disruptions we saw with the pandemic, the disruptions we're seeing in Alaska of salmon still coming back big in Bristol Bay, but not showing up in the Yukon and not showing up in Chignik or Southeast Alaska, just these huge changes in abundance or distribution of salmon and the heartbreak that goes along with losing that culture and that connection, and how we as Alaskans can respond to that, to build community around salmon and help support each other through some big disruptions and the kind of climate changes I expect we're going to see more of.
Yeah, I'll add to Linda's sentiments around sort of the funding aspect. I also threw some comments in the window here. Another thing that I'm seeing more prevalent sort of in the grant world is regionally focused funding. So I think there's a lot of people who are taking notice or finding themselves attached to the well-being of certain communities throughout the world and throughout the US, obviously within the realms of this conversation. And I think it's important or an important strategy to consider is looking for those foundations and those philanthropic opportunities that have identified, certain areas as being, of certain geographies as being of significance. On top of that is also the specification of the funding for certain types of impact, and food security has become a much bigger topic, again, in the wake of COVID. And, sustainable livelihoods, sustainable food systems, circular economy, these are all hot topics right now, climate adaptation strategies, right? There are foundations out there who are looking for those solutions and are looking to fund those solutions. I will say that, our use of those funds for NIFWF, the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, as well as USDA, we use those to build the program. So we didn't necessarily use them to subsidize the food we were producing or, use them to provide the service more than we were to design and build the program itself so that it could be self-sustaining in the future. That was really sort of the impetus. And that's a good strategy because, and I think for a lot of these foundations and, these grant givers, they also want to see sustainability, right? They also want to know that they're not building a dependence relationship with you and their funds. They do want to see that what you're doing could be self-sustaining. And so infrastructure are great projects, right? If your community where you're at, needs additional freezing capabilities or needs production capabilities or needs vehicles for distribution or logistics, those are the types of problems that they like to see solved, because those are the types of investments with that grant giving that, again, with the right business model, demonstrates that you can continue on, without their funding. And it's not to say they won't fund you again, they would just want to fund a different project. So if you've created this project that was, hey, this is, our cold storage needs, and we're going to do this, and it's going to produce X, Y, and Z for our community, they'll be stoked. And then you can go back to them and say, well, now we need to solve the transportation problem. And they would love to do that too in a lot of cases. So, you can build it out in phases. You can think about solving very unique and distinct problems for your community that funders will be excited about. But again, they're going to want to see that what they're building has resilience tied to it, and that you've sort of thought about how to make what you've built, sustainable in the long run.
That's really good points. Thanks, Alan. So we're going to transition to open question and answer. I see that Carl, we've got you. Your hand is up. My chat's disabled too, so I apologize. I've not been able to put stuff in the chat here. But before we transition to kind of open Q&A, I guess I want to throw a final question out to our panelists and just have each of you just sort of a real quick response to this. But as you think about some of the challenges we've talked about and sort of looking forward, like what is one thing that folks in the audience here and in the larger food community in Alaska, what's one thing they can be doing to help support your efforts or be involved and help make sure seafood is part of these bigger conversations around food security? So Emma, let's start with you, and then we'll go Katie, Linda, Alan, and then we'll hear from Jordan, and then we'll open it up to group questions from the audience.
Okay, I get to go first, huh? I think that really the ways that we're all getting better at being involved is knowing where our food comes from. And it started with agriculture, and it's come to be within the fishing world. But I guess when we step back from just where it comes from, what are the processes that it goes through? Can you get answers to those questions? Is it the traceability that allows you to know? Are there systems that are less fancy to say that, but have you looked in the eyes of the fishermen? I just feel like before I started fishing, I never realized that sometimes you say goodbye to your fish and you don't know what you're getting paid for it. There are a lot of sacrifices that happen because you're out in the elements. You're on a boat bobbing in the middle of the ocean. The weather's going to get you, your engine's going to break down, the tide's going to drag you in. You need to get the fish off board. And I just think that we have a romantic notion of what fishermen go through to get it back to you. But so many of those romantic ideals are in jeopardy because that's the simplistic way. It's not the mass production way. And so if you can at least know that you're buying from something that's trying its best to be local, even if it has middlemen that are a larger, like Copper River Seafoods is a larger business, but it's in my opinion, a little better than some of the larger ones that never do business in Alaska. So I think it's just find the good. That's my advice.
Great. Thanks, Emma. Yeah, just building on that a little bit, I guess, I mean, the first and, simplest way to support our efforts is to buy our fish. Make sure that you buy seafood from someone like one of us that you see here, or the many other direct marketers that are in the state. Sometimes they're a little bit harder to find, but they're there. And I think, kind of building on that, another great way to support us in scaling up is to talk to the institutions that you're a part of, whether it's a school or university or, your company that you work at, or, pretty much any other place that might have like larger buying power that might be interested in telling the story of local seafood to their clients and customers. Because one way that, we'll be able to sustain these small businesses, not only ones like Catch 49 and Alaskans Own and Real Good Fish, but the small businesses like Emma and, every small boat fisherman that you see is a small business. And so one of the ways that, we'll really be able to exponentially grow these opportunities is by finding some of those large clients that are able to say, all the fish that we serve in our university cafeteria is going to be purchased from a local small boat fisherman, or advocating whether it's going to be policy changes to make more state funding available for programs like these in our public schools and whatnot. But private companies have a big opportunity to kind of change the playing field of what local fish gets purchased and served in our own state. So that's what I would say there.
I think Katie and Emma got pretty much all of it. See if I can think of what to add. It would just be know who caught your fish, know how it was caught, go small scale, go local, and do all you can to keep the ocean healthy. And then I guess just to say, anytime you hear someone say community supported agriculture, add fish in there, community supported fisheries, and let's just see if we can't grow this movement both on land and by sea. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll add maybe one or 2 points, because again, you guys did such a great job covering the question. The eating with the ecosystem element, I think, is a really powerful component, and one that's especially salient in these day and age. Just the consumers consistent consumption of only a few species is not sustainable. And I think to the degree that any of our businesses or any of our programs can help increase the awareness around the many fish of the sea and the various benefits associated with having a diverse diet, being more open-minded about your food, can do a number of things. In most cases, it'll be healthier for you, it'll be healthier for the ecosystem, it'll be healthier for the producer. It'll often be much more affordable. When we talk about sort of the expense of seafood in relation to other proteins or other foods, yes, it can be high if you're seeking out those, again, topic predators products. But if you start to, again, look at the wide breadth of variety, many of those species are much more affordable, and I think it can serve, and also much more abundant. And so it can serve many more people and be healthier for everyone involved. It's one of those amazing win-win-win type opportunities. And then I think maybe the last thing I can add is working in synergy and partnership. I've heard a lot of stories on this panel of people, forging business partnerships and business models with other people to make things happen. And I think, the problems at hand and the challenges, the future are much too grand and much too big to be doing by ourselves, and should certainly beg the question for us all, who else in our community should we be working with, to make this happen? Because it doesn't have to be you against the world or your boat up against the elements. It can be a much more community-based and collaborative effort. So I'll leave it at that.
That's great. Thanks, Alan. And Jordan, I'm going to save you for the very end and let you do a teaser on the summit, if that's okay, as our kind of final words. But real quick, before we start to lose folks, I'm just going to open it up. We've got a couple hands raised, and I really appreciate your patience. Carl, if you're still with us, welcome. And yeah, feel free to share your questions or comments.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I had them written down. I thank you all for your presentations. I took a lot of notes. I'm a fisherman, I'm a hunter, I'm a gatherer, but I've also practiced farming for 7 years to understand the process as a small farmer. And so I've got, my elders tell me the ocean is our garden, the ocean is our nursery. And so I wanted to share that from an Indigenous perspective. So I appreciate the care that you have for our family and our fishermen in Alaska. I think that's really important. And on an exercise level, I'm working with the Alaska chapter of the National Tribal Emergency Management Council, which delivered a bunch of food up into Alaska during the COVID crisis. But the one thing that we were having trouble with was we don't have a whole lot of tribal emergency managers. So, and that being said, there's an exercise coming up that we were chartered with the National Tribal Emergency Management Council. It's all volunteer on a Thunderbird and whale exercise coming up in June on a 9.0 Cascadia earthquake and tsunami, which is a high probability over the next couple 100 years, but it's even higher now because we already, anyways, it's the probability is increasing each year. But the point is that in the future, there is going to be a big one. And so what we're working on from the Alaska chapter is actually, it's the first tribally led national incident with Homeland Security on an incident response and planning. So we're working on the food end as providing support for the Pacific Northwest. So that Cascadia subduction zone goes from California to Alaska, Southeast Alaska. So it could have a very large impact, but we also want to develop relationships, partnerships, and just even collaborations to recognize, first of all, to recognize the tribal needs, but also recognize the community needs, because as anything that happens with the tribes affects the communities in Alaska, rural communities. And so we want to work together with the fishermen. So the question is that there was COVID was touched on a few times in distribution networks, but I guess I'm trying not to be too long here, but I would like to invite you to communicate or we're going to work on establishing, this is an exercise that we just got called into. So we're now working with the National Tribal Emergency Management Council on this national incident exercise. It's called the Thunderbird and Whale exercise. And there's a lot of different components, but we're working on food distribution. So it'd be great to communicate. And I think this would also give us an idea of what we can do to support our Alaskan fishermen with distribution, especially in an emergency. So to continue what's been going on the last couple of years, but improve on that. So I just wanted to share that with you all. And I don't know where to put my contact information. I was trying to figure that out. Should I?
Yeah. I was gonna say, I don't know if you have the ability to drop it in the chat or not. And if not, Carl, we'll find a way to share your info with the panelists and vice versa. And the panelists, feel free to put your contact info in the chat. Mine is disabled, so otherwise I would. But thank you, Carl. That sounds like, yeah, really important, really relevant work. And I love that you're working from California up to Alaska, much like this panel. And just real quick, I was catching up on the chat and noticed that Brian has kindly extended our access to this virtual room for a bit. So thank you, Brian. So I know Linda, others might need to drop, feel free to do so. But for others who want to stick around and keep talking and sharing questions, we can. But before we do that, and we might lose folks, Jordan, I do want to just give you, and yeah, Charles, we'll get to your question if you can be here a little longer. Or if you have a quick question, Charles, do you want to go? And
yeah, I originally was going to put it in the chat, but it was disabled, so I couldn't. One element that hasn't been really discussed is a lot of our fish, they catch it at the processor, and then it almost immediately gets either shipped down to Seattle or shipped out of the country. And so it makes it hard for local people to have access to the fish that was caught in our waters. And what do we do to make sure that we can increase the access? I appreciate, because I'm in Sitka, so I've seen Alaskans own and even Sitka, like Catch Sitka and a couple of the other groups like Sitka Salmon Shares, how they've been able to work the CSF model. But there still is a lot of our fish that we don't even see in our local communities. And how do we bring some of that into our communities so that we can, feed elders, even just people like me who don't own my own boat, I can buy reasonably priced fish that was caught locally that I know where it came from, other than walking the dock and trying to find a boat who's, a fisherman who's selling off the boat. Not everybody can do that. How do we increase that a little bit? And maybe bring some value added stuff into our local communities as well.
Thanks for that, Charles. Yeah, I think that's the same problem we're all trying to address with the programs we have going. But I hear you, the fish is expensive. And I know we plan to explore in the next couple of years, working with local processors, ways to come up with some, and as Alan was talking about, some new products that maybe are not the salmon and halibut that are so high priced and everybody's focus, but maybe available, more affordable, maybe through fuller utilization of existing products, we can bring those costs down more. Maybe through value added, we can explore some new product types that might meet the need of someone with a tighter budget. Then is affordable, that makes halibut or salmon currently affordable. So I think there's room to increase capacity in that way. There's room to support sort of workforce development and the value added aspect of this. And there's certainly a lot of need for more capacity. How do fishermen get product off their boat? How are they able to affordably comply with all the regulations that are around processing seafood? For good reason. You don't want to get people sick, but it's tough to go that direction. I'm sure Emma knows if you're trying to manage that all yourself. And sort of make it work for small scale fishermen to do what they do well, which is fish, but also be able to take care of the other side of it and keeping it in town, but having it not take up all their fishing time.
Yeah, no, well, thanks, Charles. I think, yeah, that's the question, I think, on all of our minds, and is what sort of brings us all together. Jordan, I was going to give you kind of one of the last words here, just to, I know you stuck it in the chat, the Local Catch Network Summit, but just as we wrap up this conversation, just a great opportunity for people to stay engaged and for us to gather in person. So if you want to share just a little more about what's coming up later this year, please.
Yeah, definitely. I really appreciate the conversation and the panelists who are part of Local Catch Network and are so collaborative. And I'm always so amazed by the members of Local Catch and how they come together and share and want their partners to succeed, want their like-minded businesses to succeed. And so I just want to start off maybe by saying that in addition to maybe how we can continue to support people who are participating in this work, one of the things Local Catch Network is doing research around who is participating in direct marketing. And so over the next year, we partner with NOAA and the USDA to start putting together a survey to gather that information, to then be able to understand the landscape, who is doing this, and then what are the needs of the community. So what are the infrastructural needs in order for people to continue doing what they're doing. So if you want to learn more about that, it is on the Local Catch Network website. In addition to that, we are hosting our 4th Local Seafood Summit. It's going to be held in Girdwood, Alaska, which is where Emma resides. We have an amazing planning team who's been a part of the process. It will be held on October 2nd and 3rd. And it's an amazing space for people who are advocates for local seafood, people who have seafood businesses or are interested in direct marketing, advocates, policymakers, food service professionals to come together in the same space to celebrate this community of people who are participating in this work. We're going to eat really good seafood. We're going to have amazing agenda sessions that will help to continue conversations like the ones that were had today. And it's, again, just going to be an incredible space to come and build relationships with people from across the US and parts of Canada to lift up and elevate the work that's currently being done. So I dropped the information, our website in the chat, and I'll do that again. If you guys are interested in learning more about the summit, it's there for you to check out.
Thank you so much. Okay, well, sorry we went over, but thanks for sticking with us, everyone. I think we're going to close it there. Lots of great links and resources in the chat, so be sure to check those out for more information about our panelists and their really incredible work. And yeah, just a big thanks to our panelists just for sharing your stories and experiences. And, you know, our hope is this is the start of, you know, much bigger conversations with all of you and others. So thanks so much for joining us today, though, and have a good rest of the afternoon.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thanks for listening.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Great panel. Thanks for participating, and we'll see you in October.
Thank you, Brian.
Hey, you're welcome. As I mentioned earlier in the chat, we still have open time here because of the pre-recorded session that's occurring in this time slot. I didn't know if maybe it's good to cut it off right now and I'll leave on a high point, but if there were some other sticky issues that you weren't able to accomplish within your time frame, this room is going to remain open until 3:15. So I see we have still 19 people in the room. Does anyone in the audience have another burning question? We do have a few of the panelists still with us. If you want to troubleshoot one of the problems. Nicole, go ahead. I see your hands raised.
Yeah, hey, as we're talking about how to help the public get more in tune with these catcher sellers that are, catching it themselves, selling it themselves. Is there any, I don't know, infrastructure being thought of for a clearinghouse website where people from around, like any outfit, like what Emma's doing from around the state, if they could all be kind of tagged on there all in one place? It's hard to know who's around and doing that in your community or in nearby ones.
I'm so glad you asked that question, Nicole, because I was thinking of that earlier and there wasn't necessarily time for it, but Local Catch Network actually received a USDA grant to update what we call our seafood finder. And so when seafood harvesters join the Local Catch Network, and they are direct marketing in some capacity, then they sign up for the seafood finder. So they can, put their location, how they distribute, what species they sell, and obviously that's going to change depending on the season. What type of payment do they accept? And so this is a really good resource for anybody to be able to use across the US and Canada to determine how they can access seafood from these businesses.
Yeah, I found that super helpful. As soon as I found this network, it felt really warm and fuzzy because I knew that all of the intentions are shared. And so just like when I get a call for some fish, but I don't have that species, I just immediately know who I can share in terms of a name. So I really think Local Catch is wonderful for that. I just wanted to say something in response to Charles when he had asked before about along the same lines as Nicole in terms of what we can do. I really feel like learning how to deal with whole fish is a great way to allow fishermen the ease of selling their product, because although we still have to maintain quality and sanitation, it is a lot easier for us to just gut and bleed a fish and sell it to you on ice than it is for us to have to find somebody or get permitted to fillet it. And I feel like some fishermen see that as a barrier to becoming direct marketers. So if you know some fisherman friends, say, look into the world of direct marketing. Either reach out to Local Catch to find folks doing it. It honestly is a $25 permit to become a direct marketer. Although that is just the beginning of the expenses. If you keep it simple, you can sell your fish locally, but it's also on the consumer side of consumers saying to folks, hey, what do you know, how can we buy your fish? And so I think it's great that these questions are being asked, and find the fishermen in your community, find the local food co-op or the local CSA or CSFs. And if they're not doing it, maybe start that conversation about why they aren't.
I'd like to pose a question, if I may. With all the growth of the local fish organizations, is there going to be a time where you're going to be competing with each other? So it will make it difficult for people to, especially the fishermen, to sell their fish, or we haven't gotten to that maximum capacity yet, I'm assuming. And then my second point is, I tried to get fish from Sitka Salmon Shares, and then I found out that all their fish goes to the lower 48. So it's also important to know what the local fish organizations are selling and where they're selling, so that consumers in Alaska can purchase from the various cooperatives. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I can jump in here. That we get this question a lot, I think, and our philosophy on the subject is that by lifting one boat, we're lifting all boats, and the best thing that we can do is to increase demand for local seafood, because by increasing demand, there's plenty of people. There's plenty of people in our own communities that are eating seafood that aren't buying it from, a hyper-local source. And so the more demand there is, the more suppliers there are, potentially that helps create demand as well. And a lot of our direct marketing businesses, as you mentioned, are selling their fish outside just because it's a larger audience, commands a higher price. So that's another, challenge we find in Alaska. Catch 49 is focused only on Alaska, but right now we don't ship. And so, our business is fairly limited to folks in the greater Anchorage or Fairbanks area. And we do some work in the Valley and a couple other coastal communities as well. So I think that as long as we kind of, keep the mindset that, raising one business up is not going to hurt. It's only probably going to help the others, that, we're all in this together. That I think it'll just kind of help our whole movement across the board.
Great. Thanks, Katie. I see, Carl, you have your hand up. Would you like to contribute again?
Yeah. I mean, sorry, I'm going to put I think this is working. Can you see me? Can you hear me?
Yes and yes.
Yeah, there's a lot of infrastructure money coming out. And so what we're looking at with the National Tribal Organization is establishing needs, including infrastructure for local fishermen, which includes tribal subsistence users. So to me, it's one and the same because it's all providing for the local community and that regenerative economy. And since there's such a small amount of the resource that's actually staying in the state at this point in time, I mean, that to me, I see that the Alaska Village Initiatives is doing these, is creating these regional hubs, of these regional food hubs that are kind of like tribally based. But I think that model is really important because I saw what happened in Washington with the state of Washington with the COVID response was the tribal response ended up being the rural Washington response. And plus, like the tribes were able to provide PPPs or all the PPEs or PPPs. Anyways, the emergency supplies, including through the National Tribal Emergency Management Council and their partners with food, but emergency supplies, personal protective equipment, PPE, I guess is what it was. But it just showed that tribes are just as capable of delivering healthcare as well, because they're tribes were supporting local communities with the emergency, not only the emergency supplies, but the food as well as seafood, including them from Salish Sea. It was interesting because I was down there for the pandemic. But it was enlightening because it showed how powerful that partnership with tribes is, and the ability to empower tribes helps the whole community, especially in rural Washington. All of a sudden, there are folks coming from off reservation to get vaccinated at multiple reservations in Washington, just for an example of infrastructure supply. But one of the biggest missing problems we still have is that broadband. And so I think a combination of this broadband development, fiber optic, including like food security, along with the basic functions of communication and equity, and would be helpful for fishermen as well, because that's what I was hearing earlier too, is that ability to be able to even make a phone call once you get your catch. I mean, like that's a real issue, making sure we got communications going, and that's an emergency response preparedness. I know we got to get off. Thank you very much, everybody. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Carl. That's really great information. I think we'll cut it off here. It's 3:00. Maybe people need to take a break. And I've been told by the chief organizers I need to get off of the web here so that they can get set up for next thing. So I want to thank everyone who was in this session. Let's carry on the conversation in the future. Again, this is being recorded. There's a lot of stuff in the chat that's being recorded also. So this is the jumping off point. So we'll continue on. Thank you again.